Thank you, Adna, and thank you to the Pegasus Institute for this invitation. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to every one of you, depending on what your time zone is. Welcome to this lecture that I have named Operationalizing Peace. And when I was invited to these to provide this guest lecture, I was thinking, okay, this is the perfect opportunity for me to share a bit of what I have done, but also to define a little bit more about what peace is in the local at the local level. So a lot of people ask me on my private in my private life, what is it that you do? And sometimes it is like, okay, you can feel and see that people don't fully grasp what it is that I do, and I also have issues sometimes explaining or like understanding what is it that we are doing in the in doing development, right? So this is basically what I am going to talk about. We're going to basically go through three concrete examples of what peace has been translated on in the local level in three different contexts. We're going to go through Colombia, we're going to go through Timor-Leste and Bosnia and Herzegovina in three different projects that I have had the opportunity to work on. And so we are going to start with a brief introduction and to the situation, to the peace situation in each of the countries. I'm going to take you through a little bit of what's the peace situation like in these countries, and then we're going to focus on the activities. We're going to focus on three specific activities that I managed to work on. The first one being one inventory of the cases to be given to the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, the second being a scholarship program, and the third one a Trainer of Trainers program. And then the focus of this is going to be, as I say, on the activities, on the programming, and not on the theory. We're not gonna go much further into that at this point. I will basically I'm going to be talking about my experience, but evidently there's great ideas and great activities being done implemented at the local level. And finally, we're going to go through basically some of the lessons learned doing monitoring and evaluation in these activities, basically. We are going to go through that, and I wanted to take you next. I wanted to take you basically to this is not going to be a program or a project design kind of lecture. However, I wanted to make you closer to what I did in each of the activities, and before basically give you a hint of what I and my colleagues in the projects that I was working on did prior to the implementation of the activities and the design of the activities. Thus, first, in order to put up the activities and the programming examples that I'm going to be talking about, we did first a context analysis of which is divided in several steps. Before you do a situation profile, so basically, which is kind of a snapshot of the current and emerging historical, political, economic, security, sociocultural, and environmental factors of the context itself. Then I did the causal analysis of the conflict factors to determine first what is the core problem, then what are the effects and the root causes of each of those problems. Then you do like this stakeholder mapping, which is basically an analysis of power, and in terms of influence, in terms of support of what those actors hold. You could do also a social network analysis. We didn't do that. It was more of a network. Social network analysis is basically how actors relate between one another in the context in the context of each situation. And this context analysis, you can do it. You can also over this, you can build different scenarios. One is like where a scenario, a positive scenario where like things are going good, a negative scenario where maybe like changes get thrown to the back and not advancing, and one scenario where everything remains the same. So basically, statu quo. Then you can also, based on the context analysis, you can do the risk analysis and identify those risks and learn and put strategies on how to manage this, and then design the intervention. So prior to each of the activities, these steps took place. And in some of them, particularly on the Colombia and Timor, we also did more of an analysis on the organogram of on the organizations that we were going to work with. We evidently sat down and took a joint analysis of the needs of and select and prioritize what were we going to do and what were the most relevant needs. Evidently, we formalized the cooperation, and we went through the steps on setting up all the monitoring and evaluation tools. That is the indicators and the source of the verifications and other tools, M&E tools. So to start, we can go through the peace situation in each of the countries. We're going to be talking about Colombia first. Colombia is a country of 47 million people with a gross national income per capita of $8,094. And since its independence in 1810, so more than 200 years of history, Colombia has had an armed conflict that has spanned for over 60 years. And its cause is, if you could sum it up, it is caused basically by the inability of the state to consolidate its presence and provide public services throughout its territory, which has meant that Colombia has that the state works very well in capitals and relatively big cities. However, in the rural side, in the rural parts of Colombia, it works not so efficiently. These many variables play into the conflict. One of the most relevant ones being the narco trafficking and the issuing of and the constant production of coca leaves under its raffination into cocaine. It has been an issue since the surge of the cartels in the 1980s, and also the biodiversity. Colombia is the second most biodiverse country in the world, which makes it really hard, and with 3 mountainous ranges of the Andes. So this has meant that it is also it has been hard to reach these far off places with state services. These has the part of the conflict is driven by the state capture by local elites and local and regional elites, that basically like a handful of families that take the services, state services for their own means. And there's high inequality. The World Bank in 2022 found that in a scale from 1 to 100, Colombia scored 54.8 in the rate of inequality. And to make front of this situation, Colombia has had multiple efforts of peace building and peace agreements, but we're going to focus on 2 of the most of the latest one, maybe. For the sake of just simplifying stuff, the first one was with the United Self-Defense Forces in Colombia that were demobilized in 2005. Then these generated what what was the part of the transitional justice framework of Colombia, guaranteeing victims' right to truth, reparation, justice, and non-repetition through the justice and peace law, which is basically provides a judicial space for victims to get reparations, to get truth, and to get justice by these sentences, right? Then we have the peace agreement in 2016 with the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, which are the FARC, due to its abbreviation in Spanish. And the agreement went on about 6 agenda points, and being those there are rural reform, a political participation for the FARC and the opposition, how their disarmament was going to take place, the drug trafficking, seeing drug trafficking as a public health issue, the creation of the comprehensive system of truth, justice, reparation, and non-repetition, by which the 3 institutions were created: the Truth Commission, the Missing Persons Search Unit, and the Special Jurisdiction for Peace, and what was called the implementation and verification and endorsement. We had a plebiscite saying no to the peace agreement. However, the government negotiated with the political parties that said no, and finally we managed to achieve regulate the peace agreement. In this myriad of initiatives, we also have had the guarantees of non-repetition, such as humanitarian demining, the strengthening of the early warning system, and among others. We're going to talk about the first example, and that's going to be basically, to contextualize the situation. I was working with the German Agency for International Cooperation, the GIZ, and in a peace building project whose aimed at implementing peace policies in a better way. It had 4 pillars of work. The first one being the support to the formulation of local and regional development initiatives. We had historical memory to reconstruct the historical memory in a plural and inclusive way. The victims' reparation and land restitution, which focused on basically a more efficient application of the legislation on these matters, and the transitional justice, where I was leading this thematic area. And then there I was we were working on the strengthening of the prosecution of the crimes committed by the paramilitaries under the justice and peace criminal process, and also providing support to the creation of the new institutions, 2 of them, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace and the Missing Persons Search Unit. Finally, with this contextualization, we reached the first example, which is basically we put up, we created a report and an inventory, basically, of cases that were going to be passed on from the Attorney's General Office to the newly created Special Jurisdiction for Peace. Those cases were regarding third parties, so that is civilians or third actors that allegedly participated in the armed conflict. This is because at the time, this was in 2017, the Attorney's Office didn't know how many were the cases, who were the individuals that were being instructed or that were being linked in other in judicial processes linked to the crimes committed by the paramilitaries. So this is why we put up the methodology and the report identifying these cases. This was done through a consultancy due to the sensitivity of the information, and it led to other cooperation. We found out, the indicators that we used is that, we estimated the cases. We used the number of cases in 2 departments, in Meta, Norte, Santander, and we basically, as a target, said, okay, we're going to have 50% of the cases are going to be prepared for a judicial decision. In the findings, we found that basically 201 third parties were associated, that the attorney's office had the criminal reports and police reports of 201 individuals or companies that were allegedly just related to these crimes. But only 67 of them were linked officially to a judicial investigation. These meant public officials, members of armed forces, companies, merchants, and other unidentified individuals. This is what we found, and it was relevant. We believe that it made a serious progress, so that the attorney's office could actually report on those crimes, and the special jurisdiction for peace would take it from there and take the investigation further and guaranteeing victims' rights. With this, I'm going to briefly go on to the next country in focus, which is Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is a country of 1.4 million people with a GDP per capita of 3,742 and $42, and it was a Portuguese colony until 1975, when Portugal declares withdrawal, and there was a political party, the Fretilin Party, declares unilateral independence. But 9 days after the unilateral declaration of independence, Indonesia would come with an occupation that would lead to a 24-year civil war that would kill more or less 20% of the population. And from the 1999 to 2002, the UN would take over in a transitional period until 2002 that informally got independence. The country went back into conflict in 2006 when the police and the security forces clashed, which led to another a fifth UN peacekeeping mission in 2006, but the crisis would be over in 2008 with a failed coup attempt, where the very few convicted individuals were pardoned and given $8,500 to return to civilian life. Since then, the country has been recovering very fast. This is exemplified and illustrated by the average GDP growth per capita, which, for example, it was on 6.5% from 2007 to 2016, and other figures around, for example, maternal mortality ratio and the number of Timorese living in poverty, which has decreased severely. Timor also has been one of the biggest receivers of per capita aid in the world, one of the countries that most has received aid. However, a local NGO found that this aid has 90% of that aid would not reach the country and would go into salaries and other expenses of international organizations. And however, the major challenge in Timor-Leste, it revolves around the dependence on oil, and the oil-dependent economy that by 2015 represented 48% of the country's GDP, 97% of the exports, and 46% of the imports. And most worryingly, that basically the oil was going to run out by now, 2024. Also, it is most important since 70% of the population depends on agriculture as their livelihoods. It is very worrying that the subsistence farming has very low productivity rates. In this context, then I was again working with the German Agency for the International Cooperation, the GIZ, and I was working in a project that was aiming at that the marginalized groups in Timor would benefit from better employment in agroforestry systems in rural areas, basically three municipalities which were some of the poorest in Timor. Then in this context, the activity that we put into place was basically a scholarship program for young Timorese. That means 15 to 30 years old. In a 2-year master's programs in careers related to agroforestry and agribusiness. So we guaranteed that around 30 participants, 30 young Timorese would go to Indonesia to study. And some of the monitoring and evaluation tools that we used were revolved around the how many of those of males, females, and young people would and of those smallholder farmers would be employed in the agroforestry value chains. And we set a target of an increase of 25%. We then developed all the steps with we defined the training objectives with the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries in Timor. We identified the target audience. We identified maybe suitable programs. Also, we evaluated academic and financial requirements. Then proceed to their recruitment and selecting the candidates that we were gonna do. This activity proved that young people were very much in need or very much interested in this activity, and also portrayed the enthusiasm and the energy that they hold, the capacity that they hold. And with this, we go to our third country, which is Bosnia and Herzegovina. And to give you a brief context again, it's a country of 3.5 million people with a GDP per capita of $16,571. And Bosnia and Herzegovina Bosnia is basically a small nation. Well, it's got thousands of years of history, so I'm not going to go completely into detail, but it's a small nation in the middle of big empires. It was crossed by the Roman Empire, then the Ottoman Empire was in the Balkan Peninsula for more than 500 years. Then the Austro-Hungarian Empire was also there until Second World War, where Yugoslavia came into place under the leadership of Josip Broz Tito, who died in the 1980s, and then it was followed by the surge of nationalism and the desire for independence of each of the ethnicities in the region, which led basically to a war from 1993 to 1995 that would kill more or less 100,000 people. And then when the war was done, and after the Dayton Peace Agreement, Bosnia and Herzegovina was left basically with one of the most complex political systems in the world, and with three presidents and multiple, like a myriad of bureaucracy. The UNDP estimates that more than half of the GDP is spent in bureaucracy. And there were some efforts to tackle this situation, the most in terms of transitional justice. One of which was the International Criminal Court for the ex-Yugoslavia, who produced 90 sentences. However, these sentences are being contested, and they're being used in public debate to promote further division, unfortunately. And for example, there has been no reparations, so there is no fund in Bosnia and Herzegovina that would ensure any compensation of the damages and any other mechanism of reparations. There are and the national non-recurrence efforts that would come in the shape of peace policies or laws. They have been highly controversial, and also they have been blocked at the state level. Most importantly, the construction of a common narrative has been obstructed, and one of the most visible examples being the Truth Commission, that was basically shredded into pieces after it was after it came into light, it didn't last very long. And for example, there is no common narrative of what happened in the war. For example, a massacre in Srebrenica that killed 80,000 people between children, women, and the elderly has been highly contested. Now, for example, the most radical views, for example, around wartime rape are born into young people. Like young people have the most radical views into this terrible crime, and hate speech, for example, in 2001, in 2021, hate speech online and offline was the most reported violence and discrimination, and 26% of young people, for example, in the Western Balkan regions, thought that it was fine just to express hate, that it should be permissible to express hate in whatever fora they are. The country is also characterized by brain drain and youth immigration. So within this context, I was part of the United Nations Population Fund. I was functioning as a program analyst, and I was working on different projects. One of them in which our Trainer of Trainers program is going to take place. It takes place on one of the projects is the Youth for Inclusion, Equality, and Trust. It's a project that was funded by the Peace Building Fund and implemented by 4 agencies in 5 countries. That is UNFPA, UNDP, UNESCO, and UN Women. In 4 of Western Balkan countries, in Albania, Bosnia, North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Serbia. And it aimed at empowering young people from 15 to 30 years old to engage in efforts around constructive narratives, intercultural dialogue, inclusion, gender equality, and trust. Within this project, then we have our activity, which is the Trainer of Trainers program, in which we have the opportunity to count with Alexander Rade, which was part of this program. I'm really glad to see you here, and this this Trainer of Trainers was based on a manual that I published while being with UNFPA, the Upright Youth Peer Peace Building Manual, and that it basically comprises a series of activities that are that talk about intercultural dialogue, hate speech, and conflict transformation, but in a fun and didactic way. It's not the typical lecture time that you would see, but it's more around concrete activities that are fun to make and to work with young people. Under this project, I also had the opportunity to publish a standard operation procedure, which it's basically telling all the specificities and all the recommendations on how to, for example, put up the public call, how to do on the selection tests, on the monitoring tools. It has templates. It has a lot of resources. For this, we used the indicator. It was obviously it had disaggregated data by sex on the number of young people that reported having acquired new skills to tackle hate speech, and we targeted. We gave us the baseline value was 50, and we targeted to reach 550 people, young people. Then the results that we got basically were it was 450 young people trained and capacitated on these topics: their intercultural dialogue, hate speech, conflict transformation, and under my tenure, which was like we implemented this activity in 1.5 years, and basically, we also gladly achieved the institutionalization of this manual that I published on 3 universities program syllabi, which we thought that we still think that it guarantees ownership and sustainability in the long run, so that the money doesn't stay only in the training of the group of people that we trained, but also that it goes further. On the lessons learned, I can tell that I can tell you that basically inviting and, for example, making the program to participants is very difficult. So you basically have to use incentives. And those incentives, it can be whatever, right? It can be certificates, social media presence, career opportunities, whatever it is. But it would be better if you use incentives to guarantee that people actually attend. Um, we also defined, well, it found that it was very important to define partners that could accompany and facilitate the process, because this guarantees ownership and sustainability, basically guarantees that someone cares, and so in the we engaged nine city administrations in nine city of in Bosnia, and we hired one of their staff, and found that this really improved the quality, the delivery, and also accountability. Um, we also, well, in the trainings that we did, we asked young people to create projects and initiatives to basically tackle some of the projects that they thought that were the most pressing in their societies. And we used this to, for example, create a bank of initiatives and to use it to fundraise. We managed to get the Australian embassy to fund some of these initiatives, and we found that that was really interesting. And that yeah, some of the lessons learned were also that you gotta work towards building a network of young people that would actually work together to fight these issues. And we also found that working with young people was nice. It was fun. They're active, they're engaged, and they're also well connected. Um, so with this, I need to go to basically to the last part of this presentation, to the monitoring and evaluation part. This part encompasses the three examples that I talked about: the inventory of the cases from third parties that were probably involved in armed conflict in Colombia, the scholarship in Timor-Leste, and the trainer of trainers program in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we found that well, there is important the distinction you need to talk about when, well, I need to say that, like, when monitoring refers to tracking, to the team's efforts to track a project's progress by verifying the project's scope or the timelines against the deliverables, the budgets against in relation to schedules, the quality control, the team workload, and so forth. The evaluation, on the other hand, relates more on the measures, to like measuring the effect, and also like characterize the measured effect to a project's intervention. Some of the challenges that we faced, that I faced in these projects, and that you can find also in volatile context, are the accuracy of the data. Collecting up to date and accurate data it's difficult. So, for example, in Timor-Leste, we didn't have any national household surveys or any other initiatives to basically tie indicators to. So the project had to create basically a baseline and some information in which the project could be measured on. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, it's also quite evident, as it is very difficult to find official data. The last census was created in 2013, so it's complicated. So also some of the challenges reflect on the well, like that the projects are prone to change, right, along the way, and for example, that makes it hard to monitor the progress against the original plan. It is, well, the constraints of resources in terms of money, time, and personnel, and that consolidating all this data is time consuming and prone to error. Finally, what I did in this context to monitor, where was, as you can see in the slide, we basically identified the indicators. We identified data sources, the method of collection, the frequency and timing of it. We created roles and responsibilities, so the team would be in charge of the supervision, the data collection, and there's very important to plan. We plan time slots to do the analysis of this data. And finally, it is also very important to create clear guidelines to reporting and on how to use that that data to produce the feedback for the program. And finally, in this section, basically on the lessons learned around monitoring and evaluation is around setting. You need to be very clear in setting the expectations early, so the team can communicate like what are the updates, what are the roadblocks. As I already said, decide on the and plan the monitoring frequency, and there's lots of options into, for example, automating data collection. Lots of tools in how to do that. It's important, so because that makes it a lot faster. So that was really a lesson learned, and this is not related to the three programming examples that I put up, but it is in my experience as well. It is really good that when it is impossible to rely on primary data, like again national household surveys and so forth, it is important to create a methodology to merge secondary data, because there's lots of NGOs, CSOs, and governmental institutions or whatever that have valuable information, and that it needs to be paired into and there needs to be a methodology to do that. And finally, that there needs to be clear guidelines on if you're going to use key informant interviews or focus group discussions. There needs to be clear guidelines on this. These were basically what I learned and what we and my teams learned along the way in terms of monitoring and evaluation. And I want to conclude by saying, by giving very brief, we're going over time, but like basically, that when you're in a donor position, you need to highlight your comparative advantage and clearly state it, so you don't end up being put into an administrative or an intermediary. It is that the peace processes it is very important to make it inclusive, and inclusivity becomes a key factor in the effectiveness. The more people that you have in your activities and in your programming, the more relevant organizations that you have, the better. You need to be extra flexible these are again highly politically volatile and volatile contexts in general. So you need to be flexible in the results or indicators or the sources of information where you're going to contrast your indicators from. That faith-based organizations play a significant role in peace building, as they, for example, are the most trusted ones sometimes. And also that this is a reflection that, for example, I took from the Bosnian example, and that is that not only the results and the products, it's what counts. What counts is also about the process and the way how you achieve stuff. In the process, you need to it's not only the amount of people that are trained, but also like the tools that you provide for young people to grow professionally and to learn how to implement this process and the logic behind it. Finally, the frustration. You need to be tolerant, to be high tolerance to frustration, and know that, for example, the percentage of people that will use, for example, some of the imparted knowledge is going to be low. So, but it doesn't really you need to also take into account that change happens at the individual level, and if you can enforce change in some individuals, that would be quite a great chance and great hope for our society. With this, I conclude the presentation. I thank all of you, the ones who attended, for your time, for listening to me, and also to the PEGASUS Institute, to Adna, for this invitation. Thank you very much.